In this session, we are discussing the poet K. Sachidanandan and his literary career. The poet K. Sachidanandan is a poet, critic, playwright, essayist, short story writer, children's writer, editor, columnist, and travel writer. He has 24 collections of poetry in Malayalam. Besides 32 collections of his poetry in translation in 19 languages. One of the most translated of contemporary Indian poets is K. Sachidanandan. He was born in 1946 in central Kerala. Sachidanandan writes poetry in Malayalam and prose in Malayalam and English, and has more than 20 collections of poems, besides several books of travel, plays, and criticism, including 5 highly acclaimed books in English on Indian literature. His recent collection in English translation include While I Write, Misplaced Objects and Other Poems, The Missing Rib, and Not Only the Oceans. His translations from world poetry have been published in 4 large volumes. His work has been translated into over 7 Indian languages and into Irish, French, German, Italian, and Arabic languages apart from English. He was a professor of English and later the chief executive of the Indian National Academy of Literature. He has so far won 52 literary awards for poetry or overall literary contribution, including Sahitya Academy Award, Kerala Sahitya Academy Award, 5 times in 5 genres. He also won the Poetry for Peace International Award from the government of UAE. He is a fellow of the Kerala Sahitya Academy and has won 27 literary awards, including Indian National Academy Award. Sachidanandan's early poems were highly experimental, and publication of his first collection, Anshu Suryan, that is Five Sons, published in 1971, was an important event even in Malayalam literature. The same year, he launched Jwala, an avant-garde journal dedicated to experimental writing. His literary career began with the publication of Kurukshetram, a collection of essays on poetry, published in 1970, and as I said, Anshu Suryam, a collection of poems in 1971. Since then, he has published several books of poetry, criticism, plays, travelogues, and translations of poetry and plays. And he has edited several magazines like Jwala, Uttaram, and Panchakutira, besides many anthologies of poetry and essays in Malayalam, English, Hindi, and Slovenian. K. Sachidanandan, he has also represented India at several national and international literary events like Valmiki World Poetry Festival that was held in 1995 Delhi, and Sarajevo Poetry Days the same year 1985. Festival of India in the USSR that held in 1988, and Printemps des Poets that was held in France in 2003. And he has also attended Berlin Literary Festival in 2005, Frankfurt Book Fair 2005 and 6, Paris Book Fair in 2007, and he also attended Jaipur International Literary Festival in 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, London Book Fair in 2009, Indo-Arab Literary Festival that held in Abu Dhabi 2008, Blue Metropolis Literary Festival Montreal in 2010. Sachidanandan is a national fellow at the Institute of Advanced Study, Simla. He co-edits two online journals, Guftagoo and One Over the Eighth. And Sachidanandan is a poet who is considered as one of the most famous figure in the contemporary Indian poets. K. Sachidanandan has been writing poetry in Malayalam for over 50 years and has translated much of his own work into English, which makes him one of the India's very few poets who write with matching felicity in more than one language. His poetic vogue is almost synonymous with the journey or Malayalam and Indian poetry into modernism and beyond. A scholar critic, Sachidanandan views an extraordinary world of poetic imagination with ingredients that includes strong political conviction, a wide-ranging intimacy with global literature and art, a deep rootedness in philosophy, and unshakable mournings in his personal context of language, society, and humanism. K. Sachidanandan is arguably the finest poets writing in Malayalam. At 74, having published over 50 volumes of poetry, including translations from many Asian and European languages. He's both a peer and mentor to aspiring as well as established poets in Malayalam. He's also the most translated Malayalam poet in India and European languages. Multiple collections of his work have been published in English, Italian, Chinese, Arabic, Spanish, German, French, Hindi, Tamil, Kannada, Bengali, and Marathi, among other languages. His poetry has been celebrated across languages and cultures, as it is evident in the scores of awards and honors that he has received. He has also been invited to read at prestigious festivals across the world and deliver lectures at numerous academic institutions. His essays in literary and cultural criticism in Malayalam and English have been collected in over 20 volumes. Throw in the place travelogues, newspaper columns, editorials, and the numerous edited works. Sachidanandan is a library in himself. However, Sachidanandan is much more than his published works. For many years, he taught graduate students in small town in Kerala and edited numerous journals. The pedagogic streak in his professional life has, in fact, seeped into the core of his personality. For thousands of admirers, he provides a moral compass in a fast paced and deeply polarizing world. He is definitely a teacher, but more in the Socratic tradition committed to dialogue, debate, discussion, and constant renewal. From social media to Litfest sessions and interview slots to letters to editor columns, Sachidanandan is always in conversation with friends and foes alike, sharing sorrows, laughs, writing out and singing petitions, speaking out for justice, and arguing reason. Reading him and listening to him makes one stay in tune with the times. Sachidanandan, uh, born on May 28th in 1946 in Puluttu, a village in Thrissur district, Kerala, in a Hindu Nayar family. His father, K.C. Shankaramanan, was a small farmer, and his mother, K. Kunjakutti Amma, a homemaker. He studied in local school and graduated in zoology from Christ College, Irinjalakku. He did his post graduation in English from Maharaja College in Ernakulam in 1967. The Maharaja's College then had a galaxy of well known writers as faculty, and Ernakulam provided an urban experience to Sachidanandan, who until then had lived in the rural and semi urban parts of Thrissur district. At college, Sachidanandan read widely in Malayalam, English, and poetry and fiction, classical and modern literature, history and philosophy. It is there that Sachidanandan started getting noticed at a promising poet and essayist among a serious Malayalam readers. In 1969, he married Tulsi Devi, and the next year he joined the English faculty of Christ College. The same year, his first book, Kurukshetram, a study of modern Malayalam poetry, was published. The modernist poetry in Malayalam by Ayyappa Panikar, N. Kakkad, and Madhavan Ayyappat, M.N. Pallor, Attur Ravivarma, and many others had caught the angst of the 1950s and 60s. These writers transformed the language and diction of Malayalam poetry by risking the eye and criticism of the literary establishment of the time. The individual was at the center of this revolt in literature, and all calls to subsume individuality in a collective self was viewed with a deep suspicion by these writers. In 1960s, there were also a period of transition. The age of Nehru had ended and the communist movement was in the great turmoil. The peasant revolt in Naxalbari, the Vietnam War, the famine like situation in the country provided the conditions for a radical political and cultural upheaval in the 1970s. The cultural expressions of the 1970s, riding on a new wave of red thought, of course, did not disown the modernist tradition, but preferred to explore a new pact between the individuals and the collective. These were stridently political and was unambiguous in messaging. The Bangladesh war and refugee in influx, the Naxalite violence, the shock of the emergency, and the civil liberties turned the world upside down and found a resonance in poetry, fiction, and cinema of the 1970s. It is in the amidst of a great turmoil that a young Sachidanandan discovered his voice. Arguably, his first standout poem, when Ezekuddin writes, was published in 1971. In this poem, we find a voice tracing his legacy to the 16th century master poet who laid the foundation of modern Malayalam and exploring the relationship between the word and the world. It is a work of self discovery and a sort of statement by the poet that in the act of creation, the creator and the object of creation become indistinguishable. In the poem Fever, a 1973 poem that captures the feverish spirit of the decade, the political promise of the 70s died quickly and disillusionment set in. The violence unleashed against and by the Naxalites turned many artists who had associated with the movement against it. In the case of Sachidanandan, it made him revisit the theory and praxis of revolutionary politics. The angry collective we in his poetry made way for more reflective I poems like Ivaid Ninjan Oteyakunu. Here I am alone, mark this rupture with the old paradigm. The new politics that emerged from the radicalism of the 70s, among them environmentalism, gender, caste, found a reflection in his poems of the 1980s. A gentle and deeply empathetic and reflective voice emerged, which always spoke up for the marginalized, for justice. Like his mentor, Ayyappa Panikar, Sachidanandan has also been a prolific translator of world poetry into Malayalam. His critical studies, especially Introduction to Short Story Collection of Sukumaran and Sarah Joseph, have been seminal, introducing categories such as feminism, ecofeminism, and national popular to Malayalam literary public. Since the early 90s, Sachidanandan has been a president of Delhi. He resides there in Delhi during his stint at the Sahitya Academy, first as editor of Indian literature and later as secretary of the academy. Sachidanandan transformed this sleepy Sarkari building into a vibrant public space. He was instrumental in making literature from all over India and across caste and gender heard in various academy platforms. This spirit is now visible at the Kerala Literature Festival he curates every year in Kozhikode.